all for joining us today. We're really excited to be hosting this event. My name is Paula Barg. I am the Comcast Young Professionals Network lead, and we're really excited to be here and excited to introduce you to a bunch of people that we have. So July, and giving you a little bit background information about young professionals and YPN, July has been a pretty exceptional month for us. We have had a multitude of events and initiatives that we've kicked off, and we're really focusing on helping our members grow their career here at Comcast. I think that this event is perfectly timed for many reasons. We have a very important upcoming election that we all want to stay informed with and make sure we're in the know. And we also, if you haven't noticed, we have our hometown is hosting the DNC. So the city is very popular right now, and we're excited to be having this event here at Comcast. Our entire YPN leadership team has made it a priority to really focus and help our members not only grow professionally, but personally. And this is just one of the events to help our members, and I can look out and see a bunch of YPN members in the crowd and people streaming online. Just a way to help you understand what's going on, and maybe not necessarily just with Comcast, but with your personal life and outside of Comcast. So we've partnered with communities and community service in order to have different community service events, such as one that's coming up on Saturday, and also partnering with other external groups and organizations to make sure that we have all different types and a variety of events to offer. So thank you again, everyone, for coming here today. And without further ado, I'm honored to just turn it over to the Millennial Action Project. And Anastasia and Dan, welcome.
Excellent. Oh. Thank you very much, Paula. Can we give a round of applause for Paula and for Comcast for hosting us tonight. What a spectacular building in the heart of Philadelphia. Welcome everybody, and I hope you've all had a great chance to see our beautiful city. We're very, very proud of what we have to offer here, and to show everyone, Forbes ranked Philadelphia as the best city for millennials in the country. So with all due respect to all the other cities and great cities that you guys are from, we're very proud of what we have here. So thank you for coming. Look, this is a very, very important event, and this is, in my mind, one of the most powerful rooms that I think I'm going to be in all week. We have leaders from all across the country in every industry, and a very diverse set of folks in this room. And I know this is around the Democratic convention. I know we have a Republican or two in the room for this bipartisan organization. But, I just want to lead off with one statistic. 23% of millennials have trust in the federal government. That is a huge issue. It's an issue that we need to, combat. We need to, and I think every single day you see that that number declining. I mean, the Millennial Action Project was started to create a foundation for bipartisan cooperation and solutions. We're creating an environment that fosters collaboration and cooperation on both sides of the aisle by bringing like-minded folks together, albeit they might have different party affiliation. It's all about creating relationships across the aisle, and that's why we're here today. We're here today because we need to tackle our generation's biggest issues. And the folks that are here today, we all care about that. We care about our future, and it's really, really important. So I'm very, very happy to be here, with two great members of Congress that are going to lead this discussion today. Want to thank Comcast again for putting this together, and our great founder and president, Steven Olikara, is going to lead a great panel tonight. But I just want everyone to remember that, we need cooperation in order to get over this polarized kind of political climate that we have. And we need to kind of set aside our differences and our ideological principles and achieve something great. So I think this room today is a great testament to, what our generation brings to the table. And really, really look forward to working with all of you and to creating this environment so we can kind of overcome this hyper-partisan environment that has been created by past generations. So thank you.
So I have to echo my brother. Welcome to Philly, everyone. I hope that you're finding it easy to get around. But for the most part, we're really excited to be here. I think for me, I live in Washington, D.C., but this is the city that I yield from. And knowing that two of my passions kind of are colliding is just really, really making me very emotional, to be quite honest. But, Steve and I met, and when he kind of pitched me originally when he came to DC and started talking about the Millennial Action Project, he really pitched me this dream, and I'm proud to say that I helped build it. And, thinking about as young people, as millennials, as people in general, we all share certain values and ideals in common. The problem is that there's not enough forums in which can bring us all together so that way we can become friends, have a beer together, build consensus, and collaborate more. So we're really excited to see what Steven has been able, with our large team, to grow. Starting with the Future Caucus and the Hill, which is a bipartisan caucus that is co-chaired by Tulsi Gabbard and Will Hurd, and launching other caucuses all throughout the country in different states to bring this idea to fruition, knowing that we can bring people together, we can move the needle more on the issues that our generation cares about. And two of those people that I believe are really, really moving the needle on those issues a lot. Congressman Moulton, we're very lucky to have him today. For me, fellow Truman member, he stands for so many things that I personally believe in, and I know that young people and old people alike believe in, whether it's national service, whether it's veteran issues, whether it's national security. And most recently, we're very excited that he worked in a bipartisan manner to launch a bill which we think as millennials is very important around shared economy. So really excited to talk a little bit more about that, and I know Steve will talk about that. And my personal congressman, Congressman Boyle, representing Philadelphia very proudly, both of them rising stars on the Hill, and believe me, I see it in Washington. These guys are everywhere, and they're everywhere because they're standing for the right issues. They're standing for things that we as millennials believe in, but they're not just the future of the party, they're taking the party into the future. And so we're really, really excited to have them here today. Congressman Boyle also recently helped as an original co-sponsor for a bill, which we'll talk a little bit more about, around student debt, which is definitely an issue that we all care about, because if we have student debt, how can we become entrepreneurial? How can we, move forward or take jobs like, internships with great places that might not pay as much, where we could really move the needle, but we can't afford to do so. So attacking these issues are really, really important to our generation. Finally, I want to introduce Steven Olikara, President and CEO of Millennial Action Project. Again, he has taken this vision and he's built it up into something that we never knew could possibly happen, and he's all over the place and connecting with so many of you, and we're just really fortunate to have you guys all in the room. So if we can give them a round of applause.
All right. How's everyone doing out there? Let's try that one more time. How are we feeling right now? All right. Thank you. All right, we're going to have a lot of fun with this panel. One of the reasons why is because we're going to have some audience Q&A for the second half of this. So start thinking of questions you have for these amazing members of Congress. I have to recognize a few people off the top here, people we're very grateful to. First of all, our friends at Comcast, NBCUniversal, Gage, Clay, Paula, they've been amazing, and we're very grateful for them. Let's give a round of applause for Comcast. We have a lot of people from the MAP team and staff. Eugene is floating around here. We've got Gordon Bronson, Fran, David, so many people, as well as Dan and Anastasia, who've been integral to building this effort. So I'm very grateful to all of you. And finally, one thing that Anastasia mentioned is how we not only work in Congress, but also in state legislatures. I know we have many state co-chairs and members here today from Massachusetts to Ohio to California. So I just want to recognize the work that you all are doing as well. Thank you. But where everything started for us was the wake of the government shutdown in 2013 when we organized this bipartisan Congressional Future Caucus. And we've been grateful to have two of the rising stars in Congress be an integral part of it. And so we're going to talk about some of the issues and legislation that they've been working on, but also they've both had quite an extraordinary path into public service. And I want to start off with that, and I'll first go to Congressman Moulton. You know, what's interesting about your story is that you are not the favored Democratic candidate in the primary, and you're also in a very purple district. And while many people in a primary will tack to the extremes, you tacked more to the moderate center in both the primary and general. And I remember after you were elected, you and your team were sort of telling me how, because of how you were elected, you have the opportunity to govern in a more independent fashion. So I was wondering if you could speak more to that and how you got involved.
Yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to be here with so many impressive people. You know, I'm totally new to politics. This is not what I expected to be doing. The first congressman that my parents met was me. So this is a very new job. And frankly, even just a few years ago, when I got out of the Marines, it wasn't what I expected to be doing. But I was recruited by this nonprofit that's recruiting both Democrats and Republicans to run for Congress who are veterans of national service, not just military service, but national service, because we've never had fewer veterans in Congress in our nation's history than we do today. So they called me up when I was working in Dallas, Texas. Just to be clear, if I really wanted to run for Congress in Massachusetts, I wouldn't have taken a job in Dallas, Texas after grad school. But I was working down there, and they said you should give a shot taking on this 18-year incumbent who was my home district congressman. And I agreed with their assessment that he wasn't doing a very good job, and I thought we could do better. And so I ran against him in the primary, and about halfway through the race, we did a big poll. And we had one of the best pollsters in the country. And when you do a big poll, you don't just look at where you stand. I mean, you know, you're not close to the election, you'll probably be behind, but you look at how you're going to get to where you want to be. Well, we were 53 points down, and my pollster told me the best thing that you can do is quit. He said you should get out of the race. He said it's statistically impossible to win. And my campaign manager agreed with him. So I fired the campaign manager. But to make a long story short, it was a tough battle. Yeah, it was tough. And the entire Democratic establishment was against me. Elizabeth Warren campaigned against me. Nancy Pelosi campaigned against me. The whole state delegation. But at the end of the day, my message that Congress has gotten too partisan, and that's why we're not getting things done, resonated with people not only in the general election, but in the primary. And I wasn't so much tacking to the center as that's just who I am. That's what I believe. And I think people saw that authenticity in the race. And so I was able to win a difficult primary. And that actually was a tough general election as well. This is a district that voted by 13 points for our Republican governor in Massachusetts, but voted by 14 points for me. And I think it does, in a sense, give me some added degree of independence in Congress because I don't feel beholden to anybody. I don't feel like I owe the election to anyone in the party establishment. I was in a meeting with freshmen. Leader Pelosi was going around and saying, "I really need your vote on this. I really need your vote on this." And she got to me and I said, "Well, with all due respect, Madam Leader, I made a campaign promise. I won't vote for that." And you know what she said to me? She said, "Okay." And then she went to the next person. And it wasn't that hard, but it's tougher to do that when you feel like you owe your election to her. I've got great respect for Leader Pelosi, but I can't say that she is the reason why I'm in Congress, and I think that does give some degree of independence. And the last thing I'll say about that is that, it is pretty extraordinary in this system of government we have that someone who had no intention of running, doesn't come from a political family, is still paying his college loans as a member of Congress, can somehow break through and get into this political system. And the day after I was elected, I actually received a call from Leader Pelosi. And she didn't call to apologize. She called to congratulate me. And she said, Seth, wonderful job and everything, but I want to tell you about something. The real reason she was calling is because she needed my vote on something shortly after we got sworn in. And there's a certain beauty in that Leader Pelosi, first female leader of the House, is way more famous than me, way more accomplished, has way more Twitter followers, way more Facebook friends, right? But at the end of the day, Nancy Pelosi and freshman Seth Moulton have the same number of votes in the U.S. House of Representatives. That's a great thing about our democracy. And it's why we've got to strengthen and improve our democracy, not just check out when politics gets frustrating.
And I want to give a round of applause. I just want to mention the organization he was talking about that recruits service alums to run for Congress because they've been very successful. It's called New Politics. It's run by our good friend Emily Cherniak, and we're very grateful for.
I literally would not be here today without Emily. She was the one who literally called me up, and my first reaction to her question was, "No, something way."
And General Stanley McChrystal made his first ever partisan endorsement in a primary for Seth Moulton. It's very, very impressive. So let's go to Congressman Boyle here. Tell us more about how you decided to get involved in public service and ultimately run for Congress. And you've had the unique experience of serving with your brother actually in the state legislature here in Pennsylvania. So maybe you could speak to that as well.
Yeah, well, apparently you have to put the button that says on. I can talk a little bit about the technological challenges of our generation, I guess. But in terms of serving with my brother, first let me actually introduce him. Is here, State Representative Kevin Boyle is in the back with his Chief of Staff, Amanda, and Amanda Zellner, who does a wonderful job, and a number of constituents and friends of mine who I see in the room. So it's great to be here, and also what a wonderful opportunity for our city, and I represent part of the city, but part of the suburbs as well. Really, in this day and age in the modern economy, for this metro area to host a Democratic convention for the first time since 1948 shows you all that's changed in the city since then, but also all that's changed in the city just the last 20, 25 years, from the time I was born and raised here, and then went away to college, went away to grad school, worked in D.C. for a few years, and moved back home because I wanted to be involved in seeing the city grow, and specifically in some very exciting urban renewal projects. I was really struck listening to Seth how similar our stories were in terms of how we won our races. But first, just kind of a little bit about me personally. I'm born and raised in this city in an old-fashioned row home neighborhood. My dad came to America as an immigrant when he was 19, worked in a warehouse in South Philadelphia for 25 years. And then when those jobs left the city, was a great example of what's happened to a lot of blue-collar workers in our economy, was unemployed. Unemployed, early 50s with a high school education. So ended up, fortunately, joined SEPTA, which many of you are getting to intimately know this week. And many of you have taken the Broad Street line. That, in fact, is the line that my dad works as a maintenance custodian, and has been doing that for the last 16 years. So I believe in public service, but I do not come from a political family, although I guess we've kind of become one just in terms of the path that we've gone on. And that played a role, actually, in my career path, because I had always been interested in politics and public policy, but toward the end of college thought, well, wait a minute, is this really realistic? I literally don't know one person in politics. I was first in my family to go to college, got there because of a scholarship and student loans that I'm still repaying, and I'm so glad we'll talk about that generational issue in a moment. So I decided, I'm going to work in the private sector and really consider what exactly I'm going to do with the rest of my life. And, I had a good job at a great top-notch company, and I in no way felt fulfilled. And I was very unhappy at work and spending all of my spare time trying to read as many political websites and journals as possible because that was my real passion. And then I was working out of Old Town Alexandria on September 11th, 2001, working not in the military, but with military clients. We were in the DoD space. And one of the places that I would work at was the DC Navy Yard and the Pentagon. And so just a couple miles up the road, of course, the Pentagon was struck. And even though at that time I was in my early 20s, it was a reminder that, life is short. And being miserable at your job is too high a price to pay, no matter the pay. And so I would decide that I would make the transition, that I would go for public policy. Ended up on September 11th, 2002 was my first day at the Kennedy School of Government, did a 2-year Master's of Public Policy program, and then moved back home. I'm going to fast forward in the interest of time, just in terms of my primary. Like Seth, I was not the chosen Democratic candidate. Many of you in the room may remember it. I was running against a former congresswoman who, oh, by the way, also happened to be the mother-in-law of Chelsea Clinton. So I had former Governor Ed Rendell. I had basically the entire Democratic establishment on her side, as well as former President Clinton coming in and doing a fundraiser for her and on her TV ad, and Hillary Clinton the same. So literally back-to-back on Philadelphia television in April and May of 2014, you would see an ad with Bill Clinton talking about why you should vote for my opponent. And then on our ad, we would basically show my family story and link that to what's been going on in the middle class in this country, both in the positive but also the negative. And I had a line that I came up with in a debate spur of the moment because I said, this election really isn't about Bill Clinton. It's about the Frank Boyles of this district. That ended up being repeated by the New York Times, and then fast forward, I win. Out of the blue, for the first time in my life, I get a call from Bill Clinton. And he brings up that article and that line, and he says, and I won't do the imitation, but he says, I thought that was great. I told Hillary, I thought that was a great line. So I think that what's instructive maybe about Seth's experience, about my experience, is the common narrative that you have to be, quote unquote, the anointed candidate, or that you necessarily have to raise the most money. You do have to raise a certain amount of money, a certain threshold, but I raised the least amount of money in my 4-way race. The idea that the cynics out there want to preach is just flat out false. I can't tell you how many members I serve with who were not the chosen candidate, but they frankly ran the better campaign or they wanted it more. So ideas really do matter. The kind of campaign that you run matters. And I think that in this day and age, more than in a previous era actually, because there are literally trillions of websites and thousands of TV stations and all of these different social media platforms, we're in one sense so better connected to one another than ever before, and yet at the same time there are fewer opportunities to do exactly what we're doing today. So when you can reach someone and make a direct contact and a personal contact, that is more powerful today than I think in the era of just ABC, NBC, and CBS, and was buying TV ads. So in this dynamic, new economy, new media, it's also an exciting time to see the way political campaigns are adapting to that and how we can better reach the public.
That's great. So I want to touch on a couple issues that both of the members have been involved in, because the dominant narrative out there is that nothing's getting done, and I want to actively challenge that narrative through a couple of the issues here. So one of the interesting issues that have really come up among actually a few future caucuses is the issue of ride sharing, Uber, Lyft, and the divide has interestingly become much more generational than partisan. And so Congressman Moulton actually introduced a pretty impressive but very common sense.
Incredibly simple.
Yeah, very simple and common sense bill related to ride sharing and government employees. So I was wondering if you could just talk more about that how it came about and how and the Republican co-sponsor happens to be Will Hurd.
Yeah, I mean, I think some people think that when you get to Congress, you get access to this big book of congressional ideas that are all brilliant, time-tested proposals or whatever. I mean, what often happens is someone just comes up to you and says, why, and you say, are you kidding? That's really the case? Well, let's change that. And that was the case with regards to federal reimbursement for ride-sharing like Uber and Lyft, where a lot of federal agencies just simply don't reimburse for Uber and Lyft, even though they do reimburse for taxis, which makes no sense at all. And so we have a very simple bill that says that all federal agencies will reimburse for ride-sharing services as well, which will save the American taxpayer money and give a lot of flexibility to hardworking members of our government. So it's a very simple idea, and I think that it is interesting how this divide is playing out. Boston's having a big battle with Uber right now. They're hoping to get a law passed. I was just sitting on an Uber panel actually with David Plouffe and some other folks, and we were talking about how Uber is a great innovative tool for getting around, but you can't think of it on its own. Uber augments transit systems. It's not going to replace them. It doesn't go as fast as a well-functioning transit system, and it doesn't carry nearly as many people. In fact, David Plouffe pointed out that the real goal of Uber over time is to reduce auto usage. So it's a very interesting new economy, and it's not always playing out the way people expect.
That's great. And I don't know if Representative Evan Lowe's in the audience, but California actually enacted a very similar law in that state, and it's been very interesting to see how it's been moving, not just state to state, but now state to national. And people talk about states as the laboratories of democracy, and I think it's very true. So let's move to student loans here. Congressman Boyle has been one of the top leaders on this issue, and he's been behind a few bills, I think, on student loans. So tell us more about this issue and how you're working to address it in a bipartisan way.
Well, I really think you have to look at this issue through the prism of an economic issue, but also a moral/social justice issue. The fact that student loan debt is now the #1 source of consumer debt in our country is a major economic drag for all of us, not just for people of this generation. Believe it or not, this is one of the top issues now for the National Association of Realtors, a fairly bipartisan group, if anything a little bit right-leaning. They have realized, and you hear this all the time anecdotally from realtors, that in a previous generation, the first-time home buyer might have been in their early to mid-20s. Now, forget it. The student loan payments are crowding out what would have been the mortgage payment, keeping people in the rental pool. So now we have in this generation the latest age for first-time home ownership in our country's history. Now, part of that is we might want more flexibility. We have flocking to downtowns because renting. So student loans isn't the only reason, but it is a big part of the reason. There was from an investment bank that is not exactly known as left-leaning, released a report about a year and a half ago, long-term projections of the U.S. economy, looking out not just the next year, the next 2 years, but the next 10 years and beyond. And they downgraded the growth projection for the United States because of the amount of student loan debt that we have in this country. So this is an economic issue that our competitiveness is really being challenged on this. But then there also is simply the morality of it. I believe, and it's not surprising as a first-generation American, I believe in the American dream. That was a big part of my upbringing, of my brother's upbringing, both explicit and implicit. The idea that the basic contract of this country is that if you work hard and play by the rules, you'll have an opportunity to get ahead. Well, increasingly in a 21st century economy, we know the necessity of some form of higher education. College is not necessarily for everybody, but even the manufacturing jobs of today require a certain level of training and sophistication that manufacturing did not require in previous generations. So given that, is it really consistent with our view of America as a meritocracy to have a system in which, in order to attain that higher education, you have to take on tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of student loan debt, and oh, by the way, then when it's time to pay them back, we'll say, unlike most forms of debt, you can only refinance this once. I have loans that I'm locked into, for an example. So if they're lower interest rates, like in a mortgage economy, you can refinance. Can't do that in student loans. You're capped at $1,500 in terms of the student loan deductibility. That simply does not make any sense. So I'm a co-sponsor of a number of pieces of legislation. One, for example, is that I briefly alluded it to, that would allow those in repayment and have been good on their payments for 6 months to refinance. That doesn't forgive any debt. It simply says you can take advantage of the lower market rates today. And doing that would free up billions of dollars in our economy that then could be used by a generation that really needs it to reinvest in our economy. So I think that for both...
You got my votes on all of those.
Yeah. So for both economic competitiveness reasons, but also basic fairness reasons, I think this is one of the most important issues out there, and not just for our generation.
I know to say, we're really lucky to have Brendan working on this because it is such a complicated issue, and they're not simple. It's not as simple as passing a bill that just says, federal agencies should reimburse for Uber. This is a very complex issue. The cost of tuition is wrapped up into it, but it is so important because America has never been a land of equal results. We thrive on a free market economy. Some people are going to do well, some people not as well. But enshrined in our Constitution, we are a land of equal opportunity. And opportunity is not equal in America today because of our education system.
That's great. So another thing we've noticed working with some of the younger members of Congress is that the way business gets done is just differently, and you can see some of that illustrated in just how you've talked about these two issues. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to jump in because I have a great example, and I'm looking at Jeff Dempsey from Ceasefire PA. He was actually a part of one of the activist groups that came down to D.C. to respond to our sit-in. This is a great example of the way we're doing business and the changing technology affecting how we get our message out. So because Democratic members led by John Lewis were engaged in a sit-in, a historic sit-in on the House floor, Speaker Ryan and the Republican majority decided they would turn the C-SPAN cameras off. Even though they're broadcasted over C-SPAN, they're actually controlled by the House leadership. So in a previous era, and by previous era, I mean before a couple of years ago, that meant that's it. You couldn't see what was on the House floor, couldn't let people know what we were doing. Because of today's technology, such as Periscope, a number of our colleagues, particularly younger members, there were about 3 of them, decided they would become essentially the broadcasters and the reporters, and they showed, and then C-SPAN picked up and aired out what was going on the House floor. That could not have happened a few years ago. And I was amazed. I mean, I spoke to a group that had just gathered organically on the Capitol steps shortly after midnight. And the reason why they were watching this is because of the reason why they had the ability to watch it was because of Periscope. And I was interacting with them via Twitter. And they were asking me, oh, great pick. Can you get this? Can you get that? So I'm speaking on the House floor, also trying to take pictures to get it out on Twitter. The response from my congressional district was incredible. The number of people that made the comment saying, wow, I'd never been this excited by C-SPAN at 11 o'clock at night before. It was really remarkable, and it was a perfect example of how the technology of today is changing the way we do things and get our message out.
Excellent. Seth, did you want to mention a little bit about how you've seen the younger members work differently? And also, both of you, I think, have participated in the bipartisan gym workouts and the morning runs. Like, and it's people like to talk about it, because it's kind of a funny story. But, it has actually led to building a lot of bipartisan relationships. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to that.
To be honest, the reason why this bill is moving forward on ride sharing is because, I'm in this bipartisan workout group. And when you face off on the floor doing push-ups with Kevin McCarthy, you get to know the guy. And I mean, he's sort of partisan by nature. He's a majority leader. But I said, we've got this bill. Can you help it along? And he's been helping it along. And another example of what Brendan was talking about the role of social media, we have a bill called the Faster Care for Veterans Act, which is just enabling veterans to make appointments on their smartphone, something that's available to people in the private healthcare sector but not available to veterans today. And a lot of the co-sponsors to that legislation came on because they saw a viral video from my office of a veteran who's just on my team trying to make an appointment at the VA and getting in this like infinite loop of VA, press 6, press 3, plus 2, now press 6, press 3, plus 2. And that went viral, and members of Congress heard about it from constituents in their district who said, sign on to Moulton's bill. So it is interesting how it's changing.
Yeah. Great. Let's go to some questions here. And I think we have mics floating around potentially. But if you have a question, feel free to just raise your hand and we'll call on you. Go ahead, Mark.
Congressman, both of you, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. Mark Hogan with the Millennial Action Council on behalf of the Millennial Action Project. As with every election, we see kind of an awakening of a new generation. We've seen that on the Bernie Sanders side of the campaign for the Democratic primary. We see it a bit with the Trump campaign on the Republican side. On button, Congressman. Thank you. The big
I
question.
just learned that, so don't feel bad.
Cheers. And so the question is, you have a lot of folks that are now newly involved in politics that are young, and they broke fairly significantly in terms of voting for the eventual Democratic nominee. How do you keep those folks engaged, particularly in the most important piece of work, which happened in Congress and also at the local level, right? The president is a bully pulpit at best. The real work gets done in Congress. How do you leverage that new population of folks interested in American politics and channel them into something that can make progress rather than, getting upset and taking their ball and going home?
I think it's one of the most important things that we can achieve, and speaking specifically as a Democrat and on this side of the aisle, I think it's one of the most important things we can achieve this week. There's a great intensity and passion among the people who have been brought into the system through this cycle. But if all of a sudden people drop out because their chosen candidate didn't win, then in my view it'd be all for naught. And I have to say, I really think, as someone who was genuinely neutral in the presidential primary until fairly late, Pennsylvania votes in April. I decided to endorse Hillary Clinton in April. But as someone who really admired and appreciated that Bernie Sanders ran because of the energy he brought, and specifically because of the focus he brought on a few issues such as the student loan debt crisis, I'm glad that he ran. I think that overall, contrary to what you see in the media, I think that this primary was helpful to the Democratic Party. The same way, by the way, 2008, which actually ended up being a more bitter and closer race along the way, I do believe that race was better for the Democratic Party in the end. And I think the same thing will be true in this campaign. What Bernie Sanders has done this week, he really deserves a lot of credit for. He has been incredibly gracious, even not just endorsing her full-throated. Contrast that with Ted Cruz's performance last week. By the way, I'm glad that at our convention we can actually legitimately vote our conscience, and that's not a line where you get booed. But I would say that Sanders has gone above and beyond to show that it's not just about him personally, but he cares about the issues. And I think if he continues that and reaches out to his folks and shows why it's so important that the agenda and the issues is more important than the individual, and that in this system, in a two-party system largely, this is your choice between someone who agrees with you on many, many issues and is pushing the most progressive platform in our party's history versus someone who thoroughly rejects them, the choice would be fairly obvious.
Hi, great to see all of you. Sean Golhar. Quick question in terms of changing economic policy. So, millennials and younger folks often take different jobs throughout their career. Gig economy, changing thoughts on terms of social safety nets, 401ks. We're not seeing a lot of policy changes thinking about how younger workers are entering the economy and how they transition from job to job when we have a system that the healthcare is tied to your employer, or you're tied in this sort of old world, social safety net. I'd love to hear, Brendan, Seth, how you think about it in Congress, how folks on the other side of the aisle are thinking about this issue, and are you getting enough pressure from the public in terms of policy changes from the younger voters?
I mean, my answer is no. I mean, I think it's important to recognize that Brendan and I, proud members of the freshman class in Congress right now, we are not representative of that freshman class. You know, most of our freshman colleagues are way older than us, and most of our colleagues in Congress are way older than us. And so I think that, you know, the short answer to your question is that, you know, I think people like us, we are thinking about these issues, but Congress as a whole is not. And that's another reason why we've got to get more younger people involved. You know, I was speaking to a union up in my district, and during the campaign, they said, Seth, you know, we heard you're open to changes in Social Security. How can you say that? Social Security is going to be good for the next 25 years. And I said, guys, do the math. That doesn't get me to retirement. So if it collapses 25 years from now, that doesn't work for me. So it's, you know, a lot of people in Congress, just by virtue of where they're coming from, you know, how old they are, don't have the kind of long-term vision and view that we need for our country.
Yeah, in terms of retirement vehicles, there is a real change in terms of the way I think our generation views entering the workforce and our career versus a previous generation. So previous generation, I think of both my parents as a great example of this. Ideally, you go, you have one job, you stay there, you have a pension, and if God forbid you have to make a switch, you do it, but then that's it. For our generation, A, in this economy, that's just not the case. And B, I think for many of us, for our generation, that's also not desirable. The idea that you'll have 4 or 5, 6 careers is it's more appealing to me. And I think, not that I want to get booted out of office anytime soon, but already, actually, come to think of it, I've already had a few different careers and in my 30s. Seth is a great example of his career in the military, private sector, and now in Congress has also had at least 3 careers. So in many ways, since we're kind of hearing a lot about the sweltering summer of 1776, while we're here in Philadelphia to again make history this sweltering summer, it is a reminder that a lot of the members of our founding generation were actually like our generation. They had many different careers. They were multifaceted people. And I think our generation is representative of that. So having retirement vehicles that reflects that allows for portability, is incredibly important, and that is a way, which I agree with Seth, our system has not caught up to the realities of our economy and the desires of our generation.
Great.
Hello, my name is Matthew Fontana, and I'm a member of an organization here in Philadelphia that seeks to get millennials to vote at a greater rate, particularly in non-presidential elections where the turnout is in the anemic 11, 12, 13%. And so I was wondering, in your experiences for both of your campaigns, have you done things to specifically target the millennial demographic to get them to vote? And if so, what has been successful and what hasn't been successful?
Home court advantage, you can go first.
Oh, no. First, I'm so glad that you're working, Matthew, on that project. I was literally on a panel last night when I was talking about we of our generation, I'll say those in our 30s and 20s, in presidential election years, we vote in pretty good numbers. Oh, by the way, those elections, the other 3 out of every 4 years, are really important too. And in fact, part of the reason why on the Democratic side we've experienced 2010, 2014, the reason why we're serving in the deepest minority since 1928 is because of those elections that were the off years, and in fact the off years. I see a number of folks who were involved in politics in the Montgomery County side of my district. Friends of mine, they know that all of our important municipal races happen in those odd-numbered years where turnout just ends up being anemic on our side, and it skews the sort of policies that then those people in office care about. In terms of ways to reach them, I've been a big believer of, yes, advertising, yes, that means television, yes, that means on all of the media platforms, but let's not forget the old-fashioned door-to-door reaching people individually. In my primary campaign, that was a big part of our campaign. I held about 200, and I always say over 225, but I think it was 239 specific voter events, sometimes with 50 people, sometimes as few as 15, We had one snowy day in King of Prussia where we still did the event and 6 people showed up. And it was as simple as having free pizza and drinks and inviting people in and letting them ask every single question they could possibly think of, so you would have that direct relationship. And by the way, then when you're in office, it makes serving them better because there's already that pre-existing relationship with not just you, but also members of your team. So I really think that to the extent possible that we can use the technology that we have at our disposal today to increase direct interactions and contact with people. All the studies show, whether it's a Harvard study, University of Michigan study, the dramatic effects on voter turnout once you've reached someone directly and individually.
Just really quickly, because I think this is so important. I think it's 3 things to summarize. It's issues. We've got to talk about issues that matter to millennials. It's voter access, and there are a lot of ways we can improve voter access to make voting easier. I mean, internet voting is not going to never happen. We got to make it happen sooner than later. And the third thing is you've got to make young people feel that they have a stake in government. You know, people who serve the country, whether it's in the Marine Corps, or the Peace Corps, City Year, have a much higher propensity to vote. They understand the civic duty, but also understand that they can make a difference in our government. That's why I'm such a huge proponent of national service, of giving every American who wants to serve his or her country the opportunity to do so. And that will help with this as well. If you get young people involved in their government at an early age, they'll continue voting throughout their lives.
Great. Other questions? Okay, we have time for one more question. Who wants to get the last one? In the dress right there.
Hi, I'm Carolee Davis. I'm with Comcast YPN. Since you're focused on bringing, kind of bridging a gap between these 2 parties, is making me think if George W. Bush was recently quoted as saying he thinks if a Republican doesn't win this election, a Republican won't win any future elections from here on out. So with the fragmentation we're seeing in both the Democratic and Republican parties, do you think there's a possibility of a new party rising up, or do you think it's more going to be resolved within the existing major parties?
Yeah, the George W. Bush quote I think was that he was at a reunion for alums from his administration and said he feared that he would be the last Republican president. And I have good news and bad news for the former president, depending on your perspective. I don't think he will be the last Republican president. I hope that the Republican this November does not presidential nominee does not win. But the fact is we have a 2-party system that's very elastic. And in 1964, there was the biggest blowout in presidential history when Barry Goldwater was swamped by Lyndon Johnson. And the very next presidential election, a Republican was elected, Richard Nixon. And by the way, the same thing happened in reverse, 72 to 76, from Nixon being reelected over McGovern, talks of the Democratic Party being wiped out. The very next presidential election, a Democrat was elected in Jimmy Carter. So our parties have shown tremendous adaptability. What I would say that would make things and improve the sort of bipartisan spirit in Congress is reforming our primary system. The fact that we have such low turnout primaries where any sort of compromise is punished. So Seth may do a bold thing and compromise on 1 or 2 issues. He can have a 90% Democratic voting record, but when he's in a primary, you're not going to hear from his opponent about that 90%. You're going to hear about the few areas where he was, quote-unquote, impure. And the same exact thing happens, and frankly, to a greater extent, on the Republican side. And then people look around and say, wow, I wonder why there aren't more compromises that take place. It's human nature that we respond to our enlightened self-interest. And if we continue to see primaries where the people who are attempting to reach across the aisle are punished for it, then you're not going to have an increase in bipartisanship.
Excellent. All right. Well, first of all, this has been amazing, and we're very grateful to have you here. But let me just close with this that I think will add another layer of gratitude here, which is Congressman Boyle, you mentioned how the founders were somewhat similar to millennials in that we had multifaceted, they had multifaceted careers in many ways that we're going to be switching around as well. But I think there's another similarity as well, which is the founding fathers were of millennial aged when they actually started this country. Thomas Jefferson, who lived to be 83, wrote the Declaration of Independence when he was 33. James Madison, who lived to be 85, wrote the nation's Constitution when he was 36. So we have not only Congressmen Boyle and Moulton here, but others who are in their 30s, and I'm extremely grateful to both of them because our country is a lot better off with them in Congress. Give them a big round of applause.
Thank you.